I'm Eloise McLennan. I am Deep Dive Editor for Pharma Forum, and I'm here live at Reuters Pharma EU 2026. And I'm joined right now by Florian Schnappauf, who is VP of Commercial Strategy for Veeva AI in Europe. Hello, Florian.
Hi, Eloise.
Now, it's 2026. We cannot have a pharma industry event without talking about AI, and we have been talking about it a lot this week so far. Now, I'd like to get your take on one particular thing that has come up again and again, which is data quality, and how data that was used for human interpretation is not necessarily what is the right fit for AI interpretation. So can you tell me a little bit about what AI-ready data looks like?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Before I answer your question, just one sentence up front. I was here at the Reuters conference last year, and last year there was big buzz around AI, a lot of hype, a lot of excitement. AI can do it all. It will solve everything. It was the silver bullet we've been waiting for. That was at least my perception of the conference here last year. A lot of excitement around the topic. This year's conference focuses a lot on the practicality of AI, where to implement, how to actually get it to scale, and what is needed to put it into place. And data, as you mentioned, is one of the core things that the conference is discussing here, and AI-ready data. Now, what is AI-ready data? In my read, in our read at Veeva, it is a globally harmonized data foundation that lets you, A, produce valuable AI use cases, but then allows to scale across pilot countries, across pilot geographies, because this is where the real value lies, in scaling AI applications and use cases, and not just limiting it to POCs. I think somebody mentioned this POC mania that we're going through, right? Companies are moving away from that, and this is where the clean, harmonized global data foundation is so important for.
I think one of the key highlights from yesterday was the idea that LLMs will not make bad data better. Yeah. It will exacerbate any bad data on a much larger scale. It will make any problems much more evident. And because you don't necessarily have the human catching a mistake, you will end up with a bit of a snowball effect where you just keep getting poor results, not what you're looking for. So it's all about making sure that it's being used in the right way with data that is appropriate for its use case, and making sure that you have the checkpoints in place to make sure that there aren't any errors that are being built in.
Yes, absolutely. So I think we're moving away from a current situation where we talk about the human in the loop to an era where we might talk about the human by exception. Right? And agents operating in a more autonomous way, which is why you need to invest the hard work now to lay the right foundation. And this is data, but it's more than data. It's also kind of the application layer that the data interacts with, and the agentic layer. So you need to invest the hard work now, and this is what companies are starting to realize and starting to do now, right? So we're in this kind of post-honeymoon phase where we're starting to see the real hard work beginning in a lot of the companies in this industry.
Yes, I believe I heard it referred to as, it was the first generation last year in summer 2025. We're now in the second generation of what is evolving. But one thing that needs to be built in very, very early on is the security aspect, because if you're introducing agentic AI, you're introducing new levels of potential exploitation. So how important is building that safety into any agentic AI? It can't be the last thing on the list. It has to be built in very early on.
No. Security, cybersecurity, data security is paramount, not only in life science industry, across any industry. And just on a side note, an anecdote, if you've read the World Jobs Report by the World Economic Forum, they try to project what jobs will be important in the next 5 years. Cybersecurity makes the top of the list, right? So this is in the agentic era, in the agentic age. It's one of the core aspects that no company can avoid or hide from. So cybersecurity, data security is very important. I think for our life science specific view, the topic of compliance comes on top of that, right? It's not only security, but also compliance, and compliance by default. So if we're talking about agentic AI, agents are non-deterministic. They work in a not if-then way, but they produce varying results. And we need to, A, become comfortable with this new future of varying results and become comfortable with what agents produce. But we also need to make sure that the foundation that those agents work with is the right one, so we ensure compliance by default. And this is based on the data, but also how we implement AI capabilities in life sciences. And at Veeva, this is what we're taking kind of into our approach for AI. We're building agents that are compliant by default.
And I think one of the elements that comes into that is the conversation around what it was called the control tower earlier in one of the sessions today. The idea that many agents, thousands and thousands of agents are being built, but they have to be working for a purpose. You can't have two that overlap, that are siloed. We're not trying to create more silos. So is that something that Veeva's working on to make sure that you have that sort of central point of control?
Yeah. I'd like to think of agents, AI agents, as your coworkers, right? Your digital coworkers. And just like in any company, in any organization, any department, you wouldn't have two people do exactly the same thing at exactly the same time. And I think that's also true for the agentic age. We will see more human workers and agentic coworkers come together. We will see agents orchestrating other agents, which is exactly what you're alluding to, Eloise. And they need to work together in a constructive way, right? There's no change there, I think, from a conceptual point. It's just important that from a technology perspective, we make sure that the super agent, which is what we call these more controlling agents, right? He knows where to go. He knows which of his agentic colleagues to activate for which specific task. So he needs the context. He needs the semantics around it. Again, this is very important for our life science company. So we provide that context to the agents, and they're context aware. And at Veeva, this is exactly the approach we're taking. One agent for a specific task, context awareness, clarity of objectives, so they can be orchestrated in a meaningful manner and provide value to the company.
I think the old adage is content is king, but I think in agentic, it's context is king.
Yes.
Absolutely. So speaking of context, when we talk about agentic AI, it's been spoken of that you can't manage it in the same way that you would manage a human employee because it is not a human employee. It requires its own parameters. But when you speak about co-working, how do you work with clients to upskill? Because everybody has different levels of AI literacy, of digital literacy, of hesitancy. So how do you work with clients and pharma managers to work with AI agents?
Yeah. So I think there's two sides to this. One is the more general AI literacy. You and I were using the AI tools out there, ChatGPTs of this world, right? So I think there's already a basic literacy in most people already out there because we're exposed, right? We're using the digital tools, we're exposed, we're learning. A lot of pharma companies are putting programs in place to actually have their colleagues start working with AI tools. They're providing enterprise versions of the known AI LLMs out there to their colleagues. They help them understand how to formulate a prompt, what works best for their specific knowledge needs, etc. So that's something that's ongoing. It's a step-by-step process. We all learn more, and companies are pushing this, right? There is the other side, and the other angle is how to make an organization, a pharma company, comfortable with the fact that there is now agents working on their behalf, right? And this is where we're touching a lot of the foundations of the pharma industry, such as the compliance process, the legal process, the safety processes of this world. And suddenly we're speaking with legal teams, we're speaking with compliance teams who need to be convinced and become comfortable that also agentic coworkers, agents, can produce meaningful and reliable and compliant results. And I think that's the other half of the truth, right? One is AI literacy more generally, and that's happening and is being pushed. But the other one is making sure that organizations themselves become comfortable with that concept of working. And that's a process. We're working with a lot on our behalf from Veeva. We're working with quite a few companies now implementing AI, embedded AI at scale. And these are the challenges we face and that we need to work through. And frankly speaking, it's also a process that needs to happen over time.
And we're not for a very, very innovative industry, very risk averse. So that makes a lot of sense that companies would be very cautious to adopt such a new way of working so quickly. You mentioned challenges there. Aside from the getting everybody on board, what are some other key challenges that you're focusing on at the moment?
Yeah. So I guess it's a question of forming a joint understanding of where this might be headed for our industry, right? We formulated very recently kind of a perspective for 2030, putting it out there to understand where do we believe things are headed in the industry and what challenges might we have to overcome. And this is where pharma companies do not operate in a vacuum, right? We're working in the healthcare system with the known stakeholders. There's HCPs, doctors on the one hand side, there's the patient in the middle of it all, who we all try to serve in a meaningful way. And there's the pharma companies who interact with these other stakeholders. Now, all of these are starting to use AI tools. We've heard a lot of this during the conference here. We've heard open evidence, for example, is one of the AI tools that doctors use a lot. Patients are not asking Google anymore for their symptoms, but they're asking ChatGPT and Claude and so on about their symptoms.
I'd add to that, even if you do Google, you get the Gemini results
You
for
get-
top. So
exactly.
even if you're not intentionally going to an LLM, you are likely to get LLM results.
Absolutely. And pharma companies, as we hear here, are also starting to implement AI tools at scale. So this is happening. And if we project that into the future, we believe that algorithms, AI models will play a much more significant role in diagnosing illnesses, in providing advice for which treatment, and maybe even prescribing certain medications to patients. And if that is the case, if these AI doctors are on the rise, not only in radiology, where we've seen image recognition already for a few years, but in other areas as well. So if that's going to happen, if we believe in that, pharma companies need to ask themselves, how do I provide meaningful information to algorithms, not to humans anymore, but to machines? And that's a big challenge where you're asking about challenges. It's a mindset change, because we're not talking about this interaction anymore. We're talking about machine-to-machine interactions and providing meaningful foundational truth and information so that machines can actually give the right diagnostic advice, can give the right treatment advice to the human doctors and human counterparts. So this is a huge mindset change and kind of something we need to work towards as an industry as a whole.
There's no room for the unspoken at the moment. If you think about human interaction, you might not say the entire meaning, but it's conveyed in other ways. So with agentic AI, you need to lay it all out very plainly to make sure that all of the right information, it comes back to what we were talking about with AI-ready data, making sure that everything is in place before it goes over to an agent to make sure that you're getting the intended outcome and you don't get slight deviations because a word was used in the wrong format, the context wasn't provided.
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. In the past, I think when we talk about face-to-face interactions, human interactions, but also using digital channels and how the industry interacts with doctors and patients, we were sometimes talking about less is more, right? Kind of make sure you have a clear key message you need to convey. With machines, more might be more, right? So more information, more context that can be provided might be more meaningful. We had a dinner with executives last night, and there was a big discussion around, should pharma companies provide actually more of the information, the data they currently do not disclose publicly? That's the treasure chest that pharma companies sit on, right? Coming out of their clinical trials. And one of the participants said only around 5% of the data that is actually captured today in clinical trials might actually find its way to publication. The other 95% are not leveraged right now. So I think there is a lot of questions. That is valuable data, but will healthcare systems provide incentives in the future for pharma companies to bring more of this data to bear?
It's the same as if you look at the invention of the microscope, how much data lay in the finite details that we couldn't see. So now we have agentic AI that might help us to realize things that were hidden there, but we weren't able to utilize before. Now, I couldn't bring you to a European event without asking you what you're hearing from enterprise leaders about the changing customer environment and customer engagement in Europe.
Yeah. So I think Europe is in a very interesting position right now. Europe has a lot of innovations brought to market, not only from a product, from a treatment perspective. There is very strong R&D and pipeline results coming out of Europe, as we've seen in the past. So that's ongoing and going still strong. I think in this new paradigm, Europe needs to to make sure that drugs are also brought to market in Europe in due time, right? So launch markets are typically focusing on US first, and Europe needs to be there in kind of the first tranche. And then there's obviously the question around where R&D will be done in the future, right? Where clinical trials will happen. We heard a lot about China here yesterday. So how to work with China together, right? And there is a lot of good collaborations already going on between European companies and Chinese companies in the R&D space. So I think Europe has always benefited a lot from being connected, being interoperating, being collaborating with other geographies as well, has not been the lone fighter. And I think that's a strength that Europe should keep playing on.
And there obviously has been the big MFN cloud hanging over. We don't know a lot of what's going to happen post 2029, but there is a lot of debate as to what could happen, which is quite exciting to see that people are still very much heads down, getting to work, making sure that we're still getting the right innovation in Europe as well.
As you say, nobody knows what's going to happen, so it's meaningless to speculate. I think if Europe focuses on its strength, and we discussed some of that here at the conference yesterday, the right talent, the right infrastructure, the right financing in place here, I think Europe is very well able to compete.
Perfect. I think that's a great note to end on. Florian, thank you very, very much for joining me today. Thank you very much for joining me, and stay tuned for more updates from Reuters Pharma EU.